The whiskey-soaked laughter of the saloon fell silent the moment Victoria Lambert walked through those swinging doors, her chin held high despite every pair of eyes turning to assess her like wolves circling wounded prey. Victoria had turned 30 years old last month, and in Unionville, Nevada, that made her something of a curiosity. Most women her age had been married off by 18, already raising broods of children in dusty homesteads scattered across the unforgiving landscape. But Victoria remained untouched, unmarried, and unrepentant about it. The whispers followed her everywhere she went in this rough mining town nestled in the Humboldt Range, where men outnumbered women 10 to 1 and decent prospects for a respectable woman were few and far between. "Look at her," Martha Henley hissed to her companion at the corner table. 30 years old and still playing the virtuous maiden. Who does she think she is fooling? Victoria heard the words, as she always did, but she kept her back straight as she made her way to the bar. She had come to deliver a message to the bartender about her father's furniture order. Samuel Lambert ran the only proper carpentry shop in Unionville, and his daughter often served as his messenger when he was too busy with his craft to leave the workshop. Miss Lambert, the bartender, a grizzled man named Pete, greeted her with more respect than the other patrons showed. "What can I do for you?" "My father wanted you to know that your table will be ready by Friday," Victoria said, her voice steady and clear. "He apologizes for the delay, but he wanted to get the joinery just right." "Your father is a craftsman, no doubt about that," Pete said, nodding appreciatively. "Tell him Friday suits me just fine." As Victoria turned to leave, a hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The man attached to it was Frank Dawson, a mine foreman with a reputation for drinking too much and saying whatever came into his whiskey-addled mind. "Hold on there, Miss Lambert," Frank said, his words slurring slightly. "I've been wondering something that I think we all have been wondering. How is it that a woman of 30 years has never been married? Are you too good for the men of this town? Or is there something wrong with you that we cannot see?" The saloon erupted in snickers and murmurs. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she refused to show weakness. She yanked her wrist free from Frank's grip with surprising strength. "Perhaps the men of this town have simply never measured up to my standards," Victoria replied, her green eyes flashing with defiance. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." She walked out of the saloon with her head high, but once she was around the corner and out of sight, she allowed herself a moment to lean against the wooden wall of the general store, her heart pounding. The whispers about her virtue, her age, her unmarried status had grown louder over the past year. People speculated endlessly about why she remained alone. Some said she was too proud. Others whispered that she was barren or damaged in some unseen way. A few of the kinder souls suggested she was simply waiting for the right man. But even they said it with a pitying tone that made Victoria want to scream. The truth was simpler than any of their gossip. Victoria had received proposals over the years, more than a dozen of them. But each time, she had looked into the eyes of the men asking for her hand and seen nothing but a desire for a housekeeper, a cook, a woman to warm their beds and bear their children without any real consideration for who she was as a person. She had watched her mother wither away in a loveless marriage to a man who saw her as nothing more than a possession. When consumption finally took her mother 5 years ago, Victoria had made herself a promise. She would rather die alone than live without love. The year was 1878, and Unionville was slowly dying. The silver boom that had brought thousands of prospectors to the area in the 1860s had long since faded. Now the town survived on the remnants of mining operations and the hardy souls who had put down roots too deep to pull up easily. Most of the young women had left for Carson City or Sacramento, seeking husbands among more civilized populations. Victoria had stayed because her father needed her, because she loved the stark beauty of the Nevada mountains, and because some stubborn part of her refused to run away from the small-minded gossips who could not understand her choices. She pushed herself off the wall and began walking back to her father's workshop, which sat on the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrub brush and rocky terrain. The autumn air was crisp and carried the scent of juniper and sage. In the distance, the Humboldt Range rose against the impossibly blue sky, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Samuel Lambert was bent over his workbench when Victoria entered, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision as he planed a piece of pine. He looked up at his daughter's entrance and immediately noticed the tension in her shoulders. "What happened?" he asked, setting down his tools. "The usual," Victoria said, trying to sound casual. "Frank Dawson and his loose tongue, questioning why I am not married." Her father's jaw tightened. "That man needs to learn to keep his opinions to himself." "They all need to learn that," Victoria said wearily. "But they will not. Not until I either marry or leave town, and I am not inclined to do either simply to satisfy their curiosity." Samuel studied his daughter with concern. She looked so much like her mother, with the same dark auburn hair, the same intelligent green eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw. But where her mother had been worn down by life, Victoria burned with an inner fire that refused to be extinguished. "You know I support whatever choices you make," Samuel said carefully. "But I worry about you, Victoria. This town is not kind to women who do not fit into their narrow expectations." "I know, Papa," Victoria said softly. "But I cannot betray myself just to make them comfortable." Before Samuel could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention to the window. A rider was approaching from the mountain trail, leading a pack mule laden with furs and supplies. Even from a distance, Victoria could tell this was no ordinary townsperson. The man sat his horse with an easy confidence, his broad shoulders and powerful build evident even beneath his buckskin jacket. "Mountain man," Samuel observed. "We do not see many of them coming down this late in the season." The rider dismounted in front of the general store with fluid grace. He was tall, at least 6 feet, with dark brown hair that fell past his shoulders and a thick beard that could not quite hide the strong lines of his jaw. His arms, visible where his sleeves were rolled up despite the cool air, were corded with muscle earned through hard living in the wilderness. Everything about him spoke of strength and self-reliance. Victoria found herself staring, which annoyed her. She was not some silly girl to have her head turned by a handsome stranger. Yet there was something about this man that commanded attention. A quiet power that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with absolute confidence in his own abilities. The mountain man tied his horse to the hitching post and disappeared into the general store. Victoria forced herself to look away and focus on the accounting ledger her father kept of his orders and payments. For the next hour she tried to concentrate on the numbers in front of her, but her mind kept wandering to the stranger. It was foolish and unlike her. She had trained herself not to indulge in romantic fantasies, knowing they only led to disappointment. Yet something about the mountain man had stirred an unexpected curiosity in her chest. The bell above the workshop door chimed, and Victoria looked up to find the very object of her thoughts standing in the doorway. Up close, he was even more imposing. His eyes were a striking gray like storm clouds over the mountains, and they held an intelligence that surprised her. Many assumed mountain men were simple or uneducated, but this man's gaze was sharp and assessing. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "I am looking for Samuel Lambert. I was told he is the best carpenter in these parts." "I am Samuel Lambert," Victoria's father said, rising from his workbench. "What can I do for you?" "Name is Axel Crane," the mountain man said, stepping into the workshop. "I have a cabin about 20 miles north, up in the high country. I need some furniture built, solid pieces that will last through hard winters. I can pay in gold or furs, whichever you prefer." Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly. Most of his customers paid in script or credit. "What sort of furniture are you looking for?" "A proper bed frame, a table and chairs, shelving for supplies," Axel said. "I have been making do with what I could cobble together, but I am planning to stay up there long term." Figured it was time to have some proper furnishings. As the two men discussed dimensions and wood choices, Victoria found herself studying Axel Crane more closely. His clothes were well worn but clean and carefully mended. His hands, when he gestured, were scarred from hard work but moved with surprising grace. He spoke with the slight formality of someone who spent most of his time alone, weighing each word before speaking it. "This is my daughter, Victoria," Samuel said suddenly, gesturing toward her. "She handles the business side of things, keeps track of orders and payments." Axel turned those gray eyes on Victoria, and she felt something shift in her chest. He looked at her differently than most men did. There was no calculation, no assessment of her as a potential wife or conquest. Instead, he simply met her gaze with quiet respect, acknowledging her as a person rather than a commodity. "Miss Lambert," he said, nodding slightly. "Mr. Crane," Victoria replied, pleased that her voice came out steady. "How long will you be in town?" "A few days, most likely," Axel said. "I need to stock up on supplies before winter sets in proper. The high country gets 8 feet of snow come January. Then we should be able to have at least one piece ready before you leave," Samuel said. "The bed frame, perhaps. The rest I can have ready in 3 weeks, and you can pick them up on your next trip down." "That suits me fine," Axel agreed. They discussed payment terms and delivery logistics. Victoria took careful notes, trying to focus on the business at hand rather than the way her pulse quickened whenever Axel's deep voice filled the workshop. When the arrangements were finalized, Axel thanked them both and left to see about securing a room at the boarding house. "Interesting man," Samuel commented after he had gone. "Seems more educated than most mountain men." "He does," Victoria agreed, keeping her tone neutral even as her mind raced with questions about Axel Crane and what had brought him to the high country. That evening, Victoria helped her father close up the workshop and walked back to their small house on the quieter end of town. She prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread while Samuel washed up. They ate together in comfortable silence, a routine they had perfected over the 5 years since her mother's death. "You seem distracted today," Samuel observed as Victoria cleared the dishes. "Did I?" Victoria tried to sound casual. I suppose I was thinking about the accounts. The Hendersons still have not paid for their chairs. Her father gave her a knowing look but did not press the issue. After supper, Victoria sat by the fire with her mending while Samuel smoked his pipe and read from a month-old newspaper that had arrived from Carson City. The domestic scene was peaceful, but Victoria found her thoughts drifting to the mountains north of town, imagining what kind of life Axel Crane had carved out for himself in the wilderness. The next morning, Victoria was surprised when Axel appeared at the workshop early, carrying several prime beaver pelts. "Thought you might be able to use these for the bed frame payment," he said to Samuel. "They are good quality, should fetch a fair price." As her father examined the furs, Axel turned to Victoria. "I was wondering if you could direct me to where I might find a decent seamstress in town. I need some winter clothes mended before the snow comes." "Mrs. Chen on Main Street does excellent work," Victoria said. "But she is visiting family in Sacramento for the next 2 weeks. I could do the mending if you need it done sooner." The offer surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise Axel. She was not in the habit of offering to sew for strange men, but something about him made her want to extend the kindness. "I would not want to impose," Axel said carefully. "It is no imposition," Victoria replied. "I mend my father's clothes regularly. A few more pieces will not take much time." Axel studied her for a moment, those gray eyes searching her face as if trying to understand her motivation. Finally, he nodded. "I appreciate that, Miss Lambert. I will bring the items by this afternoon if that suits you." "That will be fine," Victoria said, wondering what had possessed her to make the offer. True to his word, Axel returned that afternoon with a bundle of clothes that needed repair. Victoria examined them with a practiced eye. The seams were splitting in several places, and buttons needed replacing, but the garments were of good quality and had been cared for as well as a lone man could manage. "These will take me a day or two," Victoria said. "Is that acceptable?" "More than acceptable," Axel replied. "I am grateful for your help." As he turned to leave, Frank Dawson and 2 of his mining friends appeared in the workshop doorway, clearly already several drinks into their afternoon. "Well, well," Frank said with a nasty grin. "Looks like the untouched spinster has finally found herself a man, a mountain man at that. How desperate have you gotten, Victoria?" Victoria felt her face flush with humiliation and anger, but before she could respond, Axel moved with startling speed. He stepped between Victoria and the 3 men, his considerable size suddenly seeming even more imposing. "You will apologize to the lady," Axel said quietly. His voice was not loud, but there was steel beneath the calm words. "Or what?" Frank blustered. Though Victoria noticed, he took a step back. "Or I will teach you what passes for manners up in the high country," Axel replied. "And I promise you will not enjoy the lesson." The threat was delivered without any visible anger, which somehow made it more effective. Frank and his companions exchanged glances, clearly reconsidering their bravado. Even drunk, they could recognize that Axel Crane was not a man to trifle with. "We did not mean any harm," one of Frank's friends muttered. "Then you will have no problem apologizing," Axel said, his gray eyes never leaving Frank's face. "Sorry, Miss Lambert," Frank mumbled, the words clearly costing him. "Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting this go," Axel said. The 3 men retreated quickly, their footsteps echoing on the wooden boardwalk outside. Once they were gone, Axel turned to Victoria, his expression softening. "I apologize for overstepping," he said, "but I could not let them speak to you that way." Victoria found herself trembling slightly, though whether from residual anger or something else entirely she was not sure. "You did not overstep. Thank you for defending me. No man should speak to a woman like that," Axel said simply. "Especially not a woman as decent as you clearly are." The sincerity in his voice made Victoria's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. When was the last time someone had defended her without expecting something in return? When had anyone called her decent without a layer of pity or judgment beneath the word? "Why did he call you that?" Axel asked, his brow furrowing. "Untouched?" Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks again, but this time it was embarrassment rather than anger. "Because I am 30 years old and unmarried. In this town that makes me an object of endless speculation and gossip." 30 is not so old," Axel said, sounding genuinely confused. "And being unmarried is your choice, is it not?" "It is," Victoria confirmed. "But not everyone understands a woman choosing to remain independent." Axel nodded slowly. "I left civilization because I got tired of people telling me how I should live my life. I suppose women face even more of that than men do." "Much more," Victoria agreed. "For what it is worth, I think waiting for the right person shows wisdom, not desperation," Axel said. "Too many people marry for the wrong reasons and end up miserable." The words struck Victoria deeply. Here was someone who understood, who did not see her choices as a character flaw or something to be pitied. She found herself wanting to know more about this man who had chosen solitude over society's expectations. "How long have you been living in the mountains?" she asked. 5 years, Axel replied. "I came west during the war, fought with the Union Army. When it was over, I could not go back to city life. Too much noise, too many people living on top of each other. I needed space to breathe. Do you ever get lonely? Victoria asked, then immediately wished she could take the question back. It was too personal, too revealing of her own curiosity. But Axel did not seem offended. He considered the question seriously before answering. Sometimes. But I would rather be alone and at peace than surrounded by people and miserable. I have the mountains, the wildlife, my books. It is a good life, books? Victoria's interest sharpened. You read? A slight smile crossed Axel's bearded face. I do. I have about 50 volumes in my cabin. Poetry, philosophy, novels. My mother was a schoolteacher back in Ohio. She made sure all her children could read and write properly. Victoria felt something shift in her chest again. A growing warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun streaming through the workshop windows. Here was a man of strength and education, someone who valued solitude and self-reliance but also appreciated literature and learning. The combination was intoxicating. They talked for another half hour, the conversation flowing easily between them. Axel told her about his cabin, built with his own hands from timber he had logged and stones he had carried up from the creek. Victoria shared her love of the Nevada landscape, the way the mountains changed color with the shifting light, the profound silence of the desert at night. They discovered a shared appreciation for the natural world, for the freedom that came from living outside society's narrow confines. When Samuel returned from delivering a chair to a customer, he found his daughter and the mountain man deep in conversation, their faces animated in a way he had not seen in Victoria for years. He cleared his throat gently, not wanting to interrupt but needing to get back to work. I should let you both get back to business, Axel said, standing. Thank you again for taking on the mending, Miss Lambert. I will check back tomorrow if that suits you. Tomorrow will be fine, Victoria said, reluctantly watching him leave. After Axel had gone, Samuel gave his daughter a searching look. He is a good man, that one. You can see it in how he carries himself. He seems to be. Victoria agreed carefully, not wanting to reveal how much the mountain man had already affected her. And he looked at you like you were someone worth looking at, Samuel added. Not like the fools in this town who only see your age and marital status. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. Her father's support meant everything to her. It does not matter, Papa. He lives 20 miles into the mountains. He will get his furniture and his mending and go back to his solitary life. Maybe, Samuel said. Or maybe he will find a reason to come down from those mountains more often. That night, Victoria worked on Axel's mending by lamplight, her needle moving with practiced efficiency through the tough fabric. As she sewed, she found herself imagining the life he led in his high-country cabin. Did he sit by his fire reading the same way she did? Did he look at the stars and wonder if somewhere in the world there was someone who might understand him? The thoughts were dangerous, she knew. She had spent years building walls around her heart, protecting herself from disappointment. But Axel Crane had breached those walls with nothing more than quiet respect and genuine conversation. The next morning, Victoria was up early, taking more care with her appearance than usual. She told herself it was simply pride in her presentation, but she knew the truth. She wanted Axel to see her as more than just the carpenter's daughter, more than the subject of town gossip. She wanted him to see her as a woman worth knowing. Axel arrived at mid-morning, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. Victoria noticed he had trimmed his beard as well, revealing more of his strong jaw. The gray eyes that met hers held a warmth that made her pulse quicken. I finished 2 of your shirts and patched the jacket, Victoria said, showing him the completed work. The trousers will be ready by this evening. You do excellent work, Axel said, examining the neat stitches. Better than the seamstress in Carson City. My mother taught me well, Victoria replied. She believed a woman should be able to support herself if necessary. She sounds like she was a wise woman, Axel said. She was, Victoria agreed softly. I miss her very much. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sharing the understanding of loss. Then Axel said, I was wondering if you might do me the honor of joining me for dinner this evening. There is not much in the way of fine dining in Unionville, but the boarding house serves a decent meal. Victoria's heart leaped, but she forced herself to think carefully. Accepting would certainly fuel the town gossip, but refusing would mean missing an opportunity to spend more time with the most interesting man she had met in years. I would like that, she said finally, deciding that she no longer cared what the gossip said. Good, Axel replied, a genuine smile crossing his face. Shall I call for you at 6? 6 would be perfect, Victoria agreed. After he left, Samuel emerged from the back room where he had been working. I heard that, he said, trying to sound stern but failing to hide his smile. You be careful with your heart, daughter. I will, Papa, Victoria promised, though she suspected it was already too late for caution. That evening, Victoria wore her best dress, a deep green calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She had pinned her auburn hair up in a simple but elegant style and allowed herself a touch of rosewater perfume. When Axel arrived precisely at 6, the appreciation in his eyes made all her effort worthwhile. They walked to the boarding house together, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed them through town. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, showed them to a small table in the corner of the dining room with a knowing smile. Over plates of roast chicken and potatoes, they continued the conversation that had begun in the workshop. Axel told her about his childhood in Ohio, the youngest of 5 siblings raised by a widowed mother who had instilled in all her children a love of learning and independence. Victoria shared her own upbringing, the loneliness of being an only child in a town that valued large families, the books that had been her constant companions. "I always thought I would leave this place," Victoria admitted, "go to San Francisco or even back east. But then my mother got sick, and after she died, my father needed me. And I realized I had put down roots here despite everything." "Roots are important," Axel said, "but so is being where you belong. Do you belong here, Victoria?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips sent a shiver through her. "I do not know anymore," she answered honestly. "Some days I think I do. Other days I feel like I am waiting for something, but I cannot name what it is." "Maybe you are waiting for the right reason to stay," Axel suggested. "Or the right reason to go. What brought you to the high country?" Victoria asked, wanting to understand what drove him. Axel was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the worn tablecloth. "After the war, I was angry. Angry at the waste, the death, the way men in power sent other men to die for their causes. I came west thinking I would make my fortune in the mines, but I hated being underground. Felt like a coffin. Then one day I rode up into the mountains and found this valley. There was a creek running through it, pine trees all around, and the biggest sky I had ever seen. I built a temporary shelter thinking I would stay a few weeks. That was 5 years ago." "Do you plan to stay there forever?" Victoria asked. "I thought I would," Axel said slowly. "But lately I have been feeling like something is missing. I could not put a name to it until yesterday." "What changed yesterday?" Victoria's heart was pounding. Axel met her eyes steadily. "I met you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Victoria felt her breath catch in her throat. She had spent years refusing to hope, protecting herself from disappointment. But looking into Axel's honest gray eyes, she found herself wanting to take the risk. "I am not an easy woman," she said carefully. "I have opinions, I am stubborn, and I refuse to pretend to be something I am not just to make others comfortable." "Good," Axel replied. "I am not looking for easy, I am looking for real." They finished their meal in charged silence, every glance and accidental touch of hands feeling significant. When Axel walked Victoria home, the night air was crisp and filled with stars. They paused outside her father's house, neither wanting the evening to end. "I leave in 3 days," Axel said. "Winter is coming and I need to get back before the heavy snows start." "I know," Victoria replied, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "But I will be back in 3 weeks for the rest of the furniture," Axel continued. "And I was thinking, if you were willing, maybe you could write to me. I check my mail at the trading post about once a month." "I would like that," Victoria said, her heart lifting at the thought of maintaining contact. "And Victoria," Axel said softly, stepping closer, "I want you to know something. Those people who gossip about you, who question your choices, they are fools. You are not untouched because something is wrong with you. You have been waiting for the right man, for someone who sees your worth. And I hope, when I come back in 3 weeks, you will give me the chance to prove that I am that man." Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. But they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I think you already have proven it," she whispered. Axel reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers incredibly gentle against her skin. "May I call on you again tomorrow?" "I would be disappointed if you did not," Victoria replied. They stood there for another moment, neither wanting to break the connection. Finally, Axel stepped back and tipped his hat. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Axel," she replied, saying his name for the first time and loving the feel of it. Inside the house, Samuel was pretending to read his newspaper, but Victoria saw the way his eyes lit up when she entered. "You look happy," he observed. "I am," Victoria admitted. "Papa, I know it is fast, but there is something about him, something real." "I saw it too," Samuel said. "He is a good man. And he looks at you the way your mother always hoped someone would. Just promise me you will be wise about this." "I promise," Victoria said, kissing her father's weathered cheek. "But I also promise I am going to let myself hope." Over the next 3 days, Axel spent every free moment with Victoria. They walked together on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes, talking about everything and nothing. Victoria learned that Axel had taught himself carpentry, botany, and survival skills through books and trial and error. Axel discovered that Victoria had a gift for drawing, filling sketchbooks with detailed renderings of plants and landscapes. They found they shared a love of Shakespeare, though they disagreed about whether the comedies or tragedies were superior. On the second day, Axel brought Victoria to see his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Mercury. The horse nuzzled Victoria's palm, looking for treats, and she laughed with delight. "He likes you," Axel observed. "He is usually suspicious of strangers." "Maybe he knows I like his master," Victoria said daringly. Axel moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Do you like his master, Victoria?" "Very much," she whispered. He kissed her then, gentle and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Victoria leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his solid chest. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more, full of promise and possibility and the sweet ache of new love. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. "I have never," Victoria started, then stopped, embarrassed. "Never been kissed?" Axel finished gently. She nodded, feeling her cheeks heat. "I told you I was untouched." "There is no shame in that," Axel said firmly. "It means you have been waiting for the right moment, the right person. I am honored to be that person, Victoria." On his last evening in town, Samuel invited Axel to dinner at their home. It was a simple meal, but the conversation was rich and warm. Samuel asked Axel about his plans for the winter, his life in the mountains, his prospects. The questions were those of a father protecting his daughter, but they were asked with respect rather than suspicion. "I have savings," Axel said honestly. "Money from my time in the army, and I sell furs and herbs to traders. I am not wealthy, but I can provide for myself. And I can provide for a wife if the right woman would have me." The statement hung in the air. Victoria felt her father's eyes on her, questioning. She met his gaze steadily and nodded, just once. Samuel seemed to relax slightly. "A man who can provide for himself and speaks honestly is a good man in my book," Samuel said. "But my daughter is precious to me. If you hurt her, mountain man or not, you will answer to me." "I would expect nothing less," Axel replied. "And I give you my word, I will treasure her as she deserves." Later, when Samuel had excused himself to give them privacy, Axel took Victoria's hands in his. "I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few days. But Victoria, I have spent 5 years in the mountains waiting for something without knowing what I was waiting for. Now I know. I was waiting for you." "I feel the same," Victoria admitted. "I have spent so many years refusing to settle, and everyone thought I was being foolish. But I knew, somehow, that there had to be someone who would see me for who I am. Someone who would value my mind as much as anything else. When I come back in 3 weeks, I am going to ask you properly," Axel said. "I am going to court you the way you deserve. But I need to know, is there hope? Do you think you could build a life with me?" Victoria thought about the cabin in the high country, about a life of solitude and simplicity. She thought about the long winters and the isolation. But she also thought about waking up every morning next to a man who respected her, who valued her opinions, who saw her as an equal partner. The choice was surprisingly easy. "There is more than hope," she said. "There is certainty." Axel pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his broad chest. Victoria could hear his heart beating, strong and steady, and felt her own heart begin to match its rhythm. They stood that way for a long time, neither speaking, just holding each other and savoring the precious moments before separation. The next morning, Victoria stood with her father outside the workshop to watch Axel prepare for his journey. He had loaded his pack mule with supplies for the winter, and checked Mercury's tack twice. When everything was ready, he came to where Victoria stood, fighting back tears. 3 weeks, he promised. "I will be back in 3 weeks, and we will start our life together properly." "Be safe," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "The mountains are dangerous." "I will be careful," Axel assured her. "I have something precious to come back to now." He kissed her once more, a kiss full of promise and longing, then swung into his saddle with easy grace. Victoria watched until horse and rider disappeared around the bend in the trail, her hand pressed to her lips where she could still feel the ghost of his kiss. "He will come back," Samuel said softly, putting an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I know," Victoria replied, "and when he does, I am going to say yes to whatever he asks." The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Victoria's life. She threw herself into her work, helping her father complete Axel's furniture with meticulous care. Every piece was crafted with love, each joint perfectly fitted, each surface sanded smooth. She wrote him a long letter, pouring out her thoughts and feelings onto paper, and took it to the trading post with instructions to forward it to the high country. The town gossips had a field day with Axel's departure. Some said he would never return, that he had simply been toying with Victoria's affections. Others whispered that no man would seriously want a 30-year-old virgin, that Axel had probably fled back to the mountains in horror. Martha Henley made it her personal mission to remind Victoria at every opportunity that mountain men were notoriously unreliable. But Victoria held on to her faith. She remembered the sincerity in Axel's eyes, the gentle strength of his hands, the way he had defended her without hesitation. He would come back. She was certain of it. On the morning of the 21st day, Victoria was helping her father load a dresser onto a delivery wagon when she heard hoofbeats approaching from the mountain trail. Her heart leaped into her throat as she turned to see Mercury trotting down the main street, Axel sitting tall in the saddle. He looked leaner, harder somehow, with 3 weeks of mountain living etched into his weathered face. But when he saw Victoria, his expression transformed into pure joy. He dismounted before Mercury had fully stopped and strode toward her with purposeful steps. "You came back," Victoria breathed, even though she had known he would. "Did you doubt it?" Axel asked, pulling her into his arms right there in the middle of town for everyone to see. "Not for a moment," Victoria replied, laughing and crying at the same time. All around them, people stared in shock. Frank Dawson stood slack-jawed outside the saloon. Martha Henley clutched her basket with white-knuckled hands, her mouth hanging open. But Victoria did not care about any of them. All that mattered was the man holding her like she was something infinitely precious. "I got your letter," Axel said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I read it 17 times. Victoria Lambert, I love you. I have loved you since the moment you offered to mend my clothes without expecting anything in return. Will you marry me? Will you come live with me in the mountains and build a life together?" "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "Yes to everything." Axel kissed her then, a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings or intentions. When they finally pulled apart, he was grinning like a boy at Christmas. "I brought you something," he said, pulling a small bundle from his coat pocket. "It is not much, but I made it myself." Victoria unwrapped the cloth to find a ring carved from dark wood, inlaid with small stones that glittered in the sunlight. It was beautiful in its simplicity, clearly crafted with great care and skill. "The wood is from a cedar tree near my cabin," Axel explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The stones are garnets I found in the creek. I wanted you to have something that came from the place that will be our home. It is perfect," Victoria whispered, admiring the way the ring caught the light. Samuel emerged from the workshop, wiping his hands on his apron. When he saw his daughter's radiant face and the ring on her finger, he smiled broadly. "I take it congratulations are in order?" "We are getting married, Papa," Victoria said, unable to contain her joy. "Then I suppose I should finish that furniture with extra care," Samuel replied. "Cannot have my daughter starting her married life without proper furnishings." Over the next few days, plans were made with surprising speed. Victoria and Axel decided on a small ceremony at the church, with only Samuel and a few trusted friends in attendance. There was no point in a large wedding when most of the town had spent years gossiping about Victoria. She wanted to start her new life without the weight of their judgment. Martha Henley tried to corner Victoria outside the general store 3 days before the wedding. "You are making a terrible mistake," she hissed. "That man is a hermit. He will take you up into those mountains and you will never be seen again." "Then I will die happy," Victoria replied calmly, "which is more than I can say for staying here and listening to your poisonous words for the rest of my life." Martha recoiled as if struck. "You will regret this. You will come crawling back before the year is out." "I will not," Victoria said with absolute certainty. "Because I am finally going where I belong, with the man I was meant to find." The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, with golden aspen leaves falling like blessings around the small church. Victoria wore a simple dress of cream-colored wool that her mother had made years ago, altered to fit her perfectly. Axel wore a new suit that had clearly been purchased just for the occasion, though he looked slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothing. Samuel walked his daughter down the short aisle, tears glistening in his eyes. When he placed Victoria's hand in Axel's, he said softly, "Take care of my girl, with my life," Axel promised. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Axel kissed Victoria with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. At the small reception in the boarding house, Frank Dawson made an unexpected appearance. He approached the newlyweds with hesitant steps, his hat clutched in his hands. "Miss Lambert, I mean Mrs. Crane," he stammered. "I wanted to apologize for the things I said. I was drunk and stupid, and you did not deserve that." Victoria studied him for a moment, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. "Apology accepted, Mr. Dawson. I hope you find your own happiness someday." Frank nodded gratefully and retreated, leaving Victoria feeling lighter. She had no need for grudges now that her life was moving forward in such a wonderful direction. Axel had arranged to stay in town for 2 more days to give Samuel time to finish the last pieces of furniture. Victoria spent those days with her father, helping him in the workshop one final time, memorizing the familiar smells of sawdust and wood oil, the comfortable rhythm of their shared labor. "I am going to miss you terribly," Samuel admitted on the last evening. "This house will be too quiet without you." "Come visit us," Victoria urged. "Axel says the trail is manageable for someone experienced with mountain travel. Come for Christmas or in the spring when the wildflowers bloom." "I will," Samuel promised. "And you write to me regularly. I want to know that you are happy and well." I will be both, Victoria assured him. Papa, thank you for never pressuring me to marry someone I did not love. Thank you for believing that I was worth waiting for the right man. You were always worth waiting for, Samuel said gruffly, pulling his daughter into a tight embrace. Now go build your life with that mountain man of yours. He is a good man, Victoria. Your mother would have approved. On a bright morning in late October, Victoria Lambert Crane said goodbye to the only home she had ever known. The furniture was loaded onto a sturdy wagon that Axel had borrowed from a trader friend. Victoria's personal belongings, packed carefully in 2 trunks, were secured alongside. She wore practical traveling clothes and boots, ready for the journey into the high country. The trail climbed steadily through pine forests and aspen groves, following a creek that tumbled over smooth stones. Axel rode Mercury, while Victoria handled the wagon team with surprising skill. He pointed out landmarks along the way, telling her the names of peaks and valleys, showing her where he hunted elk in the fall and where wild berries grew thick in summer. I should warn you, Axel said as they paused to rest the horses. The cabin is not fancy. It is solid and warm. But it is not what you are used to, Axel, Victoria said gently. I did not marry you for fancy things. I married you for the life we will build together. They traveled for 6 hours, climbing higher into the mountains until the air grew noticeably thinner and cooler. When they finally rounded a bend and Victoria saw the valley that would be her new home, she gasped in wonder. The cabin sat in a natural clearing beside a clear creek with towering pines surrounding it on 3 sides. The 4th side opened to a meadow that sloped down to the water. Mountains rose in every direction, their peaks dusted with snow that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. It was wild and remote and absolutely beautiful. Welcome home, Mrs. Crane, Axel said softly. Victoria climbed down from the wagon and turned in a slow circle, taking in every detail. She could hear the creek babbling, the wind sighing through the pines, and absolutely nothing else. The silence was profound and peaceful. The cabin itself was larger than she had expected, built from logs that had been carefully chinked and fitted. Axel had clearly taken pride in his work. He helped her inside, and Victoria found a single large room with a stone fireplace at one end, a cooking area along one wall, and sleeping space at the other end. Large windows on 2 walls let in plenty of light and offered spectacular views of the surrounding wilderness. I know it needs work, Axel began, but Victoria stopped him with a kiss. It is perfect, she said firmly, or it will be, once we get the furniture arranged and I add some curtains and proper organization. They spent the rest of the day unloading the wagon and arranging the new furniture. The bed frame fit perfectly in the sleeping area, and Victoria made it up with quilts she had brought from town. The table and chairs claimed the center of the room, creating a proper dining space. The shelves were mounted along one wall, and Victoria immediately began organizing Axel's books and supplies with an efficiency that made him smile. As darkness fell, Axel built a fire in the fireplace and prepared a simple meal of venison stew. They ate by firelight, shoulders touching, talking softly about their plans for the cabin and the land. After dinner, Axel showed Victoria the rest of his property by lantern light, pointing out the small barn where Mercury stayed, the root cellar for food storage, and the creek where he got water. I thought we could expand the garden next spring, Axel said. Maybe build a proper chicken coop. And there is a spot up the hill that would be perfect for a second room if we need more space someday. Victoria heard the unspoken hope in his words. More space for children, for a growing family. The thought filled her with warmth and anticipation. That night, lying in their marriage bed with the mountain wind whispering outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Victoria finally understood what she had been waiting for all these years. Not just a husband, but a partner. Not just a home, but a place where she truly belonged. Axel held her with a gentleness that belied his strength, murmuring words of love and devotion against her hair. Their first joining was tender and careful. Axel taking his time to make sure Victoria felt cherished rather than simply claimed. There was some discomfort at first, as was natural, but it faded quickly under Axel's patient attentions. Afterward, Victoria lay in his arms feeling fundamentally changed, no longer the untouched spinster the town had mocked, but a woman fully claimed by love. No regrets? Axel asked softly. Not a single one, Victoria replied, kissing his chest. I was waiting for you, Axel Crane. I was waiting for exactly this. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Victoria learned the rhythms of mountain life, hauling water from the creek, maintaining the fire, preserving food for winter. Axel taught her how to shoot, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to move quietly through the forest. She surprised him with her quick learning and natural aptitude for frontier living. In turn, Victoria brought order and comfort to the cabin. She sewed curtains for the windows, organized supplies with practical efficiency, and cooked meals that were far superior to Axel's simple bachelor fare. She set up a small workspace where she could sketch and write letters to her father. The cabin slowly transformed from a hermit's shelter into a true home. At night, they would sit by the fire reading aloud to each other, or Axel would play the harmonica he had learned as a boy, while Victoria mended clothes or worked on embroidery. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing the details of their days, their thoughts and dreams. The intimacy of these quiet moments was as precious to Victoria as their physical connection. The first snow came in early November, transforming the valley into a wonderland of white. Victoria stood at the window watching the flakes fall and felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. Axel came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and resting his chin on her head. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever imagined possible," Victoria replied honestly. As winter deepened, they became truly snowed in, the trail to town impassable until spring. But Victoria did not feel trapped. Instead, she felt cocooned in a perfect world of two. They spent Christmas by their own fire, exchanging simple gifts. A new hat Victoria had knitted for Axel, a set of sketching pencils he had ordered from a catalog for her. The gifts were modest, but the love behind them was boundless. In January, during a brief warm spell, a trader named Tom Harrison made his way up to the cabin on snowshoes. He brought mail, including several letters from Samuel and news from town. "You created quite the scandal, Mrs. Crane," Tom said with a friendly grin. "Half the town is convinced you will come back before spring, claiming the mountain man mistreated you. The other half thinks you are dead and frozen in the snow." "Please tell my father I am very much alive and happier than I have ever been," Victoria said, laughing. "And tell the gossips they can keep their opinions to themselves." Tom also brought surprising news. Frank Dawson had stopped drinking and was courting the widow Henderson with surprising sincerity. Martha Henley had been voted off the church committee after one too many vicious comments. The town, it seemed, was slowly changing without Victoria there to serve as a target for their small-minded cruelty. After Tom left, Axel held Victoria close. "Do you miss it? Town, people, civilization?" Victoria considered the question honestly. "I miss my father. But the town itself? No. I feel more at home here with you than I ever did surrounded by people who never truly saw me." In February, Victoria realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was the change in altitude or the different diet. But as the days passed and certain other signs appeared, she began to suspect the truth. When she finally told Axel, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately set her down gently as if afraid he might hurt her. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We are," Victoria confirmed, her hand resting on her still flat belly. That night, Axel was even more tender than usual, treating Victoria like she was made of spun glass. She had to remind him that pregnancy was a natural condition, not an illness, and that she was still the same strong woman he had married. But his protective instincts, always strong, had multiplied tenfold with the news of impending fatherhood. Spring came slowly to the high country, the snow melting in patches to reveal the dark earth beneath. Victoria watched the transformation with fascination, seeing wildflowers emerge almost overnight once the weather warmed. Axel took her on gentle walks around the property, showing her the places where mushrooms grew, where wild onions could be harvested, where the deer came to drink at dawn. As her belly began to swell with their child, Victoria felt more beautiful than she ever had. Axel would sit for hours just watching her, his hand resting on her stomach, talking to the baby about the life they would have together. He built a cradle from pine wood, carving animals into the headboard with painstaking detail. Victoria sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. In May, when the trail was finally clear, Samuel made the journey up to visit. His face when he saw his daughter, glowing with health and happiness and pregnancy, was worth all the hardship of the past months. "You look wonderful," he said, embracing Victoria carefully. "Truly wonderful." "I am wonderful, Papa," Victoria replied. "Everything I hoped for and more." Samuel spent a week with them, getting to know his son-in-law better, examining the cabin and land with approval. Before he left, he took Axel aside for a private conversation. "I was wrong to worry," Samuel admitted. "She has never been happier. Thank you for seeing what everyone else missed." "She was worth waiting for," Axel replied simply. "We both were." The summer passed in a blur of activity. Axel expanded the garden, built the chicken coop he had promised, and started work on an addition to the cabin for a nursery. Victoria tended the vegetables, gathered herbs, and prepared for the baby's arrival with the help of a midwife from a nearby settlement who agreed to come when her time was near. On a golden afternoon in late September, Victoria went into labor. The midwife, a capable woman named Helen, had arrived 2 days earlier and now guided Victoria through the process with calm expertise. Axel paced outside, unable to sit still, until Helen called him in to support his wife through the final stages. When their son was finally born, red-faced and squalling with healthy lungs, Axel wept openly. He held the tiny bundle with infinite care, marveling at the perfect fingers and toes, the shock of dark hair, the eyes that would eventually turn the same storm gray as his father's. What should we name him? Axel asked Victoria, who was exhausted but radiant. Andrew Samuel Crane, Victoria said without hesitation. After you and my father, Andrew Samuel, Axel repeated, testing the name. It is perfect. The first year of Andrew's life passed in the unique exhaustion and joy that all new parents experience. Victoria discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, managing the household and caring for an infant in the wilderness with grace and determination. Axel was a devoted father, walking the floor with Andrew when he was fussy, singing to him in his deep voice, proudly pointing out every tiny milestone. Samuel visited twice more, bringing gifts and supplies from town. On his second visit, he brought astonishing news. The territorial legislature had voted to allow women to serve on school boards in Nevada. It was a small step toward equality, but it gave Victoria hope that the world her son would grow up in might be slightly more just than the one she had known. On their second wedding anniversary, Axel and Victoria stood together on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching Andrew toddle around the yard chasing butterflies. The mountains rose around them, eternal and beautiful, and the valley was filled with the sounds of life. Chickens clucking, the creek babbling, their son's delighted laughter. Do you ever think about what the people in town said? Axel asked, pulling Victoria close. About you being untouched at 30, about them being shocked that I wanted you. Victoria smiled, remembering Frank Dawson's crude words that day in her father's workshop, the gossip that had followed her for years. Sometimes, but then I remember what you said that first week. I was not untouched because something was wrong with me. I was waiting for the right man. And you found him, Axel said with satisfaction. We found each other, Victoria corrected. Two people who refused to settle for less than real love and real partnership. Andrew squealed with delight as he caught up to a butterfly that was kind enough to land on a flower. Victoria watched her son, thought about the child she could feel quickening in her belly again, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the path her life had taken. The town had been shocked when the mountain man claimed her. They had whispered that she was desperate, foolish, throwing her life away on a hermit who would eventually break her heart. But Victoria knew the truth that they could never understand. She had not been claimed by anyone. She had chosen freely, loved deeply, and built a life that was authentically her own. As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Axel kissed the top of Victoria's head. I love you, Mrs. Crane. I love you too, Mr. Crane, Victoria replied, her heart full to bursting. They stood there together, watching their son play in the twilight, surrounded by the wilderness that had become their home. The mountains kept their secrets, the creek sang its endless song, and in a small valley far from judgment and gossip, two people who had waited for the right love lived there happily ever after. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. Victoria gave birth to a daughter they named Violet Rose in the spring of Andrew's third year. She had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her older brother everywhere with determined steps. 2 years after Violet came another son, Adam Joseph, who inherited his father's quiet strength and his mother's intelligence. The cabin expanded again to accommodate their growing family, eventually becoming a proper house with multiple rooms and a wide porch where the family would gather on summer evenings. Axel built a larger barn and added more livestock. Victoria established a garden that was the envy of the few neighbors scattered throughout the high country. Samuel remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting as often as the seasons allowed. He delighted in his grandchildren, teaching them woodworking and telling them stories of their mother as a young girl. When he grew too old to make the journey himself, Axel would load the family into a wagon and take them down to Unionville for visits. On those rare trips to town, Victoria would sometimes encounter the people who had gossiped about her so cruelly. Martha Henley, now elderly and bitter, would sniff disapprovingly at Victoria's obvious happiness. But Frank Dawson, who had indeed married the widow Henderson and found his own contentment, would always tip his hat respectfully. You proved us all wrong, Mrs. Crane, he said once, sincerity in his weathered face. And I am glad you did. Victoria's old house in Unionville eventually became the home where Samuel lived out his final years, surrounded by the furniture he had crafted and the memories of his beloved daughter's childhood. When he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Victoria mourned deeply, but found comfort in knowing he had seen her happy and fulfilled. The children grew strong and capable, raised with the independence and self-reliance their parents valued. Andrew inherited his father's skill with his hands and became an accomplished carpenter in his own right. Violet surprised everyone with a gift for mathematics and eventually became a school teacher, one of the first women in Nevada to earn a proper teaching certificate. Adam, the youngest, loved the mountains as deeply as his father did and took over management of the high country property when Axel's joints began to ache with age. Through it all, the love between Victoria and Axel never wavered. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they always returned to the foundation of respect and genuine affection that had brought them together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset over the mountains they both loved, Axel took Victoria's hand. "I have been thinking about that day in your father's workshop," he said, "when Frank Dawson asked why you were still unmarried at 30. That was a lifetime ago," Victoria replied, though she remembered it clearly. "I wish I could go back and tell that version of you what was coming," Axel continued. "Tell her that in just a few days she would meet the man who would give her everything she had been waiting for. Tell her that her patience and refusal to settle would be rewarded beyond her wildest dreams." Victoria squeezed his hand, feeling the strength still present despite the weathering of age. "She would not have believed you." She had convinced herself that love like this was just a fantasy, that she would spend her life alone. "But she was wrong," Axel said softly. "So wrong," Victoria agreed. "And I have never been happier to be proven wrong about anything." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Victoria reflected on the path her life had taken. She had faced ridicule and judgment for refusing to marry young, for waiting for something real rather than settling for convenience. The people of Unionville had called her foolish, desperate, damaged. They had been shocked when the mountain man chose her, convinced it could only end in disaster, but she had known. From that very first conversation in her father's workshop, she had recognized in Axel Crane a kindred spirit, someone who valued authenticity over conformity, love over convenience. He had seen her not as an old maid or a curiosity, but as a woman worth waiting for, worth courting, worth spending a lifetime loving. And she had been right to wait, right to trust her instincts, right to refuse to compromise on something as important as love. Their children grew and had children of their own, filling the mountain valley with new life and laughter. Andrew married a kind woman from Carson City and built a home near his parents. Violet's mathematics skills took her to San Francisco, but she returned every summer with her husband and children. Adam married a girl from a neighboring ranch and continued the family's tradition of living close to the land. Victoria lived to see her grandchildren grow, and even met her first great-grandchildren before age finally claimed her at 74. She passed peacefully in the bed Axel had built with his own hands so many decades earlier, surrounded by the family that had grown from a seed of love planted in a dusty Nevada workshop. Axel followed her less than a year later, unable to bear the separation. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their valley, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and a single inscription. They waited for each other. The cabin that Axel had built with his own hands remained in the Crane family for generations, each successive occupant adding to it while preserving the core structure that represented the foundation of their family. The story of the untouched woman who shocked everyone by marrying the mountain man became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder that true love was worth waiting for, no matter what others might say. In the end, Victoria Lambert Crane's legacy was not defined by the gossips who had mocked her or the town that had misunderstood her. It was defined by the love she had shared with Axel, the family they had built together, and the example they had set of two people who refused to settle for anything less than real, authentic, transformative love. She had been untouched at 30 and they had been shocked, but the mountain man had seen the truth. She had not been waiting in vain. She had been waiting for exactly the right man, and when he finally arrived, their love had proven worth every moment of patience, every year of waiting, every whispered criticism from those too small-minded to understand, and they had lived, loved, and created a legacy that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with a lightning bolt of passion, but with quiet recognition of a kindred soul and the courage to wait for exactly what you deserve.